get this one done and try to get started on 11 so that you have sufficient time to do all the end of course items tomorrow night. But we're going to talk about, and always these things say you will learn, we're going to talk about how to design security policies, user training practices, and then physically secure assets and manage safety controls in these things. So the first one, the security policies. We talk a little bit about security policies, how to plan secure user and personnel policies, common business contracts, and then how to address security concerns with third-party data access. Third-party data access is a real issue. Before we get going, drag this over here. This is a page from insecure.org, and it's called instantsecuritypolicy.com and on down the line. But SANS, actually SANS.org, has templates for just about any policy that you want. Products page, acceptable use, backup. I haven't clicked on them lately, but sample policies, they may be selling them now. They used to give them away for free. They do have free trial and they do have samples. So there are policy templates available around the internet, and I may have clicked on the wrong thing. SANS policy templates. SANS policy templates. Yeah, it looks like they're selling them now. They used to give them away. So everybody's figured out that they're going to make money on these things, I guess. Now, if you go to somebody selling SANS templates, this is at SANS.org, which is it's a good place to go visit. They have training there, live training, all sorts of stuff, paid training, free training. Lots of information is available here. So find a policy template you need: general, network security, server security, application security, and then some old and retired and maybe just tired policies. But SANS.org if will give you, we go to the network security, acquisition, Bluetooth, remote access policy, a lot of things that we've mentioned: wireless communication, server security, database technology, application security, web application security on these things, and then general policies: acceptable encryption, acceptable use, clean desk, data breach, disaster recovery, digital signature, email policy, ethics policy, things that we're going to mention in tonight's material when you do those things. So security documentation is a big deal. One of the reasons it's a big deal, something bad happens to us, we have a breach, instead of running around and then we used to have an old saying, when in danger or in doubt, run in circles, scream and shout. That's not what you want to happen. You want to have an orderly process for these things. You need the checklists. You need to know who's responsible for what. Who's going to do item A, item B on down the line. Different things that you need to be able to do. And we could ID risks when we do the security documentation. Not only could we should ID the risks that are available. Apply controls to minimize the risks, and the controls are the actions that we take to control what goes on with these things. Are we missing something? And that's where the checklists come in, and that's where the templates come in, and those sorts of things. Need a documented plan. When something happens, be it big, little, who's going to do what? Who's going to do what in order to keep the company running so that we can stay in business? Cover business strategies and security goals. Some of them could, and we're focused on security, but it could be the business strategies themselves. How are we going to maintain the business? The big thing that we're worried about is something bad happens. How are we going to keep the company running because with the existing business strategies? So policies themselves, and this is just out of the book. We have a framework, a program or blueprint that documents the overall process needed to design policies. And we're going to use standards, and standards are the third one there, a definition of specific methodologies or requirements. And then we have policies. Policies are how we want to do business. What's your policy on this or your policy on that? What's the attendance policy? The attendance policy is you got to come to 80% of the classes in order to get a certificate of completion. Policy is we'd really like you to be at all of the classes, but the minimum is to attend 80% of the classes. So it's a statement stating how the organization is to be run from a management perspective. Talks about intents and goals. You know, things like, yeah, we want to be a great company. We want to be a secure company. It doesn't really help a whole lot in that definition. We want to, produce widgets that have a 90% acceptance rate in quality assurance or whatever. But policies, security policies, acceptable use policies, what can we do? What are we allowed to do? What are we not allowed to do? Guidelines are descriptions of best practices or recommendations. So guidelines are the recommendations or best practices that are going to be used with these things. A benchmark, a checklist of potential vulnerabilities in a piece of software along with the configuration settings to harden it. And benchmarks are usually objectives, same things that we want to achieve, and the checklist of potential vulnerabilities, the benchmarks that we want to achieve something that doesn't have these vulnerabilities. Procedures are specific and ordered instructions. And in Navy, and I guess they're still doing 3M in the Navy, which had specific ordered procedures. We used to talk about nuclear engineers have checklists for everything. And yeah, because it's much safer to do that. I was in the propulsion section for a long time, and we had specific procedures in order when we're going to light off a boiler. Because, it could get kind of risky if you got it going in the wrong direction. If you run it dry, you're going to blow it up. If you get too much water in it, you're going to ruin it. If you get the fuel going in the wrong direction, if you bring the steam pressures up too fast, all of those things. So we had specific procedures which were ordered lists. And then controls are safeguard or countermeasures designed to reduce the security risk, physical and technological tools. And we've talked about some of those. The safeguard, the countermeasures to reduce the security risk. The controls are the things that we do to manage the risk. We're never going to eliminate the risk, but the best we can do is manage it, to mitigate it, to make it to reduce the threat. That's what we're going to do. The perfect security world, the objective is to ensure the company follows the best policies. We're going to calculate the risks, find controls and procedures to minimize those, and be sure that nobody cuts corners. Back to one of the comments, I think it was Caleb's, get rid of the inattentive or insufficient, that wasn't exactly his words, employees. We don't want people cutting corners, because if you do, you cut the corner, that there's going to be something left that's going to be vulnerable. But not a perfect world. We don't have perfect employees. So yeah, we have to have policies in order to provide guidance. And one of the things we're going to say, and I'll say it now and we'll say it later, when you have a policy, there's going to be consequences. If you violate the policy, what are the consequences? If you violate the 80% attendance policy, what are the consequences? You can't get a certificate of completion. You may need it, you may not need it. Maybe that you're here for certain things, but all policies to be effective have to have some sort of consequence related to them. Regulatory compliance, and this is a list, and these are in the book that have a little bit better explanation, or a little bit of explanation actually, about what goes on here. Sarbanes-Oxley Act of 2002, called SOX. It's the one that says that it has to do with financial information and the truthfulness of financial information. And I think this is the one that the CEO has to sign, that it is valid, the financial information is valid, so that people aren't, telling lies to get their stock prices to go up, or get their stock prices to go down so that they can buy more and then bring it up. So they're not manipulating those things. FISMA, Federal Information Security Management Act, applies to, obviously, to security. HIPAA, the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act, how medical information has to be handled. Family Educational Rights Privacy Act, Graham-Leachman Bliley Act, and the Payment Card Industry Standard Security, or Data Security Standard. And that's the one that probably would affect us on a day-to-day basis most directly, because it's how your credit cards handle, how credit card information is handled, what kind of security has to be applied to them. The policy frameworks, NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technologies, has a series of documents that describes the cybersecurity standards and best practices for the federal government. And a lot of industry uses that series in order to apply controls. What should we do? What shouldn't we do? ISO 27000 series, broad policy framework containing security guidelines in all sorts of organizations, and it has a certification process, and I see things was that ISO 9000 certified companies can do those things. COBIT, control objectives for information and related technologies, published by ISACA for complying with the Sarbanes-Oxley rules, and ITIL, which a number of you have, the Information Technology Infrastructure Library, published by Excelos, focuses on the service aspect of IT. So a lot of, policies, procedures, guidelines are available, and these are available publicly, especially the NIST. You can download all of the NIST series if you want to do them. Secure configuration guides are going to be a framework for the broad policy. They can create their own security baseline, and let's try to get to that website. A secure guide for helpful. The Center for Internet Security here has some cybersecurity tools, and this is what the link goes to. The Center for Internet Security, cybersecurity tools. They have the best practices available here. We have to accept that they use cookies, controls, benchmarks, proven guidelines will enable you to safeguard operating system software and networks that are most vulnerable to cyber attacks. They are continuously verified by a volunteer IT community to combat evolving cybersecurity changes. So that link has a number of tools that are available to you that you may or may not need to, want to have when you do these things. Though the policy itself is a high-level document. Can be a single document. Normally it's going to be made up of multiple documents. Taken as a whole are going to be the company policy. Functional, the individuals, we have a bunch of them functioning together. When we take them as a whole, they're going to be the policy itself. High level. And an example here, if your risk assessment identified a need for network firewalls, your network security policy should specify when firewalls should be deployed, what capabilities they must have, and maybe even what vendors are acceptable. Maybe you want to have multiple vendors. We've talked about that. And if you have multiple vendors and you do that before you have somebody operating them, you may also want to talk about what kind of training that they're going to have before they get get onto the firewalls before we actually put them in place, because a misconfigured firewall can cause an awful lot of damage to let people in. A little example of the movie that we talked about earlier in the class, where somebody had, opened the port, misconfigured on purpose to do a specific task, then forgot to close the port when we do those. The firewalls themselves and the procedures for installing and configuring them are security controls used to enforce the network policy. So we have the policy about them, and then the controls on what we're going to do to make them effective. By role, managerial staff. Issues that they are meant to address: legal, regulatory requirements. Who has access to what information? Who is going to, and this is from the management standpoint, obviously, who can get to what? Activities, processes, and actions necessary to enact the policy. How employees are expected to comply, and the consequences for non-compliance. What's going to happen? Revision procedures, because policies, once in place, do they work? May they work really good for this area, but they don't work for the other area. What is the revision procedure? You can't just say, okay, whoever finds it's going to revise it has got to go through a review and approval process. And all these policies should go through a review and approval process, to be sure that, lots of people look at them more eyes, and everybody looks at them from a different perspective. And when you're looking at these things, don't forget about the worker bee, because, how is this going to impact them? Is it going to be accepted? How's it going to be accepted? Is it going to work? We used to have a policy that everybody had to wear a badge, and people didn't like to wear badges. They do at work, but they didn't want to for the school. So somebody had the bright idea that we're not going to let you come into the building. Instead, at the building entrance, we're not going to let you into the building without the badge. Send a student home to get the badge, and you know what? They don't come back. So how are you going to enforce these policies? What are going to be the consequences for noncompliance? Administrators and technicians, where we want to be, best practices, security goals. What are going to be the technological standards and the technological tools that we use for these things? Procedure documents, user permission policies, and then data disposal policies. Equipment, and not in here, but equipment disposal policies. When you get ready to get rid computers, what are you going to do with them? How are you going to do? Are you going to donate them? I mean, and the hard drives obviously are the big deal with these things. How are we going to handle that? Paper, I don't know that that's such a big deal as long as you're not going to need it anymore. But one of the other things, when you get ready to dispose of data, be sure you don't need it anymore before you get rid of it, because once it's gone, it's gone. If you shred it, it's gone. Shred it and burn it, it's really gone. But data disposal policies, how do we get rid of that? How do we get rid of the hardware that we don't need anymore? And then the types of policies, and we'll have a little look at, I think, some of these. I won't say all of these things, but we have the acceptable use policies, guidelines for network resources, the use of network resources. What can you use it for? Can you use the network to go to your personal email account? Can you do internet surfing? Some places allow it, some places don't allow it. If you do surf, what kind of websites can you go to? Are you restricted to the websites you can go to? So what are the acceptable use policies of the internet? And it may even be for the equipment itself too. One of them, can you make changes to it? Can you change the background? Can you put a background picture on while you're logged on for your profile? Can you use flash drives? Can you plug them in? What are the issues? Can you install programs? So what are the acceptable use policies for the network resources, not just the internet itself, but all of the resources? And you got to really think about some of these things. Flash drives, we got some problems with flash drives. One of the ways that viruses get distributed is the distributor of the virus, drops, loses, detailed part of ITIL4. I don't know. I don't know ITIL, so I just do what's here. But one of the things that people that want to distribute viruses do is they put them on a flash drive and drop them in the parking lot. And you say, oh, I'll plug it in and see if I can figure out who it belongs to. So you plug it in and you have just installed a virus. So are you going to allow those sorts of things to happen? I tried to look at the ITIL objectives for the certification, and it looks like there is some crossover with some of these candida when we do that. So hopefully this sort of documentation builds on the documentation that you've already learned about, talked about, and maybe hopefully done the cert on. Codify expectations of user privacy, consent to security-based monitoring. Are we violating somebody's policy? Do you have an expectation of privacy on the network? You shouldn't really have an expectation of privacy on the corporate network. It's their network. It's their equipment, although people claim that sometimes, but that needs to be explicitly spelled out. You have, and ours said, you have no expectation of privacy on this network. We need to monitor what's going on. We could, and I never did, but we could always look into users' home directories. I said never did. I never did unless there was a good reason to, like when the virus scanner hit on a virus there, you go look and you find whatever the infected file is, and then you find there's a whole lot of other stuff that probably shouldn't be there. Create and maintaining passwords. What's the password policy going to be? How often do you have to change them? How long do they have to be? Complexity requirements. What are you doing to teach people how to make good passwords that they can remember? My last job in the Navy, we were on the network, and we had access to secret, I think, through the desktops, and we had to change, and I probably, I don't know, really frequently, maybe every 3 weeks, every month, had to change the passwords. But you didn't get to choose your own password. You got to select from a series of what really was character strings that were presented to you. Can't write it down, they come check those things. So you have to find something in some way to remember these things. And that's the thing to think about with your users. And I really have seen passwords posted on Post-its on the monitors in an office. So people, how are they going to do that? Creating, maintaining the passwords, how are we going to do that? Asset management policy, tracking of hardware and software. You say, oh, that's easy. Not really. Not only the tracking of hardware, yeah, we can look and see the box, but what's inside it? You have to inventory the contents of the machines also, of the computers also. How much memory's in it? What kind of processor's in it? What kind of video card? And in the software, where is it installed? How many licenses do we own? Are we legal on the licenses? And in business, you really got to be legal on these things, because government entities that have 3 letters in them come by or have the authority to come into businesses and check for software piracy. Incident response policies in response to instances, and we don't want to, and the companies never want to acknowledge an incident. An incident is an event that's, an unexpected event, I think is what we say with those. So incident response, steps taken in response to incidences. How are we going to make it maybe sound not so bad? Because if you keep getting hacked, guess what? Nobody's going to come to you. Nobody's going to come there. Disaster planning, business continuity policies, and I've covered a lot of the slides that we're going to do, I think. Business continuity, the steps to be taken to secure assets, protect staff, maintain business operations during disruptions. And this disaster planning isn't, that the power went out for an hour or the hard drive crashed. This disaster planning is that there was a big fire in the building last night, and Nothing's working. The knock's gone. What are you going to do to maintain the business? How are we going to do that? And there are some statistics that small businesses that lose their data have major incidences. Like 50% of them go out of business within a year of losing that data. Change management policies, updating the policies and procedures. How are we going to do that? What is the procedure? Who can recommend changes? Should be probably anybody can recommend changes, but who's going to consider the changes? Who's going to approve the changes? Who's going to actually put them in the document itself and then publish the changes? Standard operating procedures, steps for routine tasks, and these are, this is the way that we do certain things. This is the way that we create new users. This is the way that we assign permissions. This is the way that we do whatever different steps, things that we may do in the company itself. Documents, the overview, the documents themselves, the sections is what we're talking about here. The purpose, including risk being addressed and how the policy will minimize it. The overview, basically the summary of what this policy is all about. The scope, where the policy applies. The details, the rules. Can refer to external documents, and it could refer to other policies. That certain things will be done in accordance with a certain policy or in certain standard operating procedure or certain standards, whatever we're going to do. But the details are the rules, the things that are going on. And then the enforcement and auditing. Who enforces it? What are the consequences that are involved in it? The definitions, technical terms, and these are things that you see, I think, when you look at these policies, the technical terms. And from this course that the technical terms are really one of the hindrances or the obstacles or the things that we have to overcome when we're doing these things, both in all of networking. It's its own language, and we have to learn that. What do the terms mean for these things? They need to be defined here. Revision history, the dates, and who authorized each change. The update history, logged in. It could be at the beginning or at the end of the document, and I think a lot of them that we use were actually put in the front. There's a sheet in the front of the revision history for the devices themselves. A little bit of look at some of the policies here now. Acceptable use. Again, I hopefully covered a lot of this. The prevent behavior that compromises security. We want to make a network as secure as possible. We don't want data exfiltration. We don't want somebody to installing viruses, and that's back to the things that I talked about early on, port security, with the users who would come in and plug their laptop into the network. We didn't know what was on it. Could be a virus of some kind. Could be a Trojan. Could be a worm. Could be perfectly safe, but we knew what actions we took on our machine, so port security allowed us to do that. But acceptable use policy says, hey, you can't do that. I've had students who worked, and a lot of you guys come through, and some of you have worked in IT for some time, have IT jobs, but they said, students aren't the only ones that do that. Bosses do that. They will come in and plug in a wireless router, or they'll plug in a switch because they want to be able to use all these other devices and want to be able to connect right there. They want the greatest signal. They want to use their own device. Is that safe? Who else can get onto that? And remember, when you do wireless, acceptable use policy, wireless, that anybody can get the wireless signals now on your network, not just the boss that plugged it in his office. Software installation. Who can install software? And I told you about our nurses who said they needed to do it. And they installed that. They installed a lot of other stuff too that was not good for the network. Took up a lot of bandwidth, had a lot of risk associated with it. And they even got some viruses along with the with the add-ins for the browser add-ins that they used. Social networking time. Can you or can't you? Back whenever they had all these games on Facebook, we didn't want Facebook in the classroom. We didn't actually even want it in the building, but our headquarters activity did. So they directed that it had to be available. But we had an issue that, and nurses, everybody was, but nurses, and you really don't want, a nurse to not have to miss that part of whatever they're doing for you. So they were playing the games, of farm game, whatever it was. Again, I'm not a Facebooker, but they were playing these games in class. Let me get Raphael marked here. So what we wound up doing is that they could get on social networking, could get on Facebook and those things in the library, on the machines in the library. So we could limit that. That's one of those, where you are sort of locations that you can do that. Thing that you have to worry about, personal email and chats and those sorts of things, harassing email or messages that came from your network, you may have some responsibility in that. So you have to be careful about those things. And then it's got to have consequences. What if I violate the acceptable use policy? What's going to happen? And the consequences may be up to and including termination. But the sign the agreement there is the key to that. The individuals need to sign the acceptable use policy saying that, yeah, I acknowledge it, I agree to abide by it, so that you can have consequences. If they haven't been presented with it, don't know about it, haven't agreed to it, then it's not anything that is going to be enforceable. One of the other things, and story that you may have heard, is on the warning that, the pop-up when you get ready to log on, the warning that whatever it is, be really specific with that about what is acceptable for people that are logging in, the login banner. Many years ago now, somebody got onto a network, hacked the network, did a lot of damage to the network. Company took them to court. Company lost because the logon banner said, "Welcome to our network." The defense was, "Welcome to our network." They didn't say anything about any of the other stuff that I did. So you have to be really specific about that. The NSA and CIA have some examples that you can use for those sorts of things when you do that. So acceptable use policy, internet use, things that probably you're going to not allow offensive content, point-to-point downloads, excessive time on social networks, and you may not even allow social networks. Company account use, associate the company with the activity. If that happens, hardware and software, what you have access to, what are the acceptable changes, what kind of things can you do or not do. Mobile devices, are they allowed, where are they allowed? And you may have a situation that mobile devices are not allowed in certain areas, secure areas. You don't want cameras in there with recording devices that can take photographs in secure areas of different things that you may not want the world to know about. Privacy policy, what activities may be recorded. And how is your information shared? What information is shared? Is any information shared? Policy communication and the notification of changes when changes come out. And this is all part of the notification of changes would be part of training that would go on with the systems themselves. Password policies. The length here, these are the recommended 8 to 12 characters. Reason being that 7 characters, the password cracking softwares usually split the passwords into two parts, into the characters, in 7 character parts. If you have 7 characters only, it only has to crack half of the password, because the other half will be padding, and the padding is always the same if you have it. So 8 to 12 characters. Complexity, mix of letters, numbers, special characters, and I do recommend special characters. We used to use LoftCrack when it was one of those free. It's another one of those that used to be free, that now you have to pay for it. But we would try out passwords, how long it took to crack them. And when we put special characters in, it really increased the time significantly. If you use rainbow tables, it doesn't really matter a whole lot, because the hashes are pre-configured. It takes, I think, 18 minutes. But you have to also determine how many characters that you're going against before that happens. So 8 to 12 characters, some range there. How long are they going to be good for? Recommendation 30 to 90 days in order to do that. Why do we do those? Because if somebody gets it and they're floating around, we know they're floating around on the internet, you might have changed it. Hopefully by the time somebody gets it and cracks it, then it's not going to be valid anymore. The history, 12 to 24 prior passwords stored so that you can reuse them, but after a while. And then we talked about the minimum password age yesterday. Sharing and storage, prohibit where possible, and secure where it's not possible. Passwords, and one of the things about passwords, I know we always say, don't write them down. Sometimes you got it, because you got so many of them, how do you remember them? Write them down in a secure place. The other one is, the administrator got a lot of passwords. A lot of passwords to really important stuff. What happens if the administrator gets hospitalized for some reason for an extended period of time? The passwords, the equipment passwords, the official passwords really should be written down, put in a sealed envelope, and then held by a trusted individual. I guess we could call it an escrow. Maybe in a campus director, locked up, put in a safe somewhere. And then when they change, obviously they need to be changed at that point. So, human resources policies. And hiring qualified, trustworthy. They're responsible for hiring qualified people, trustworthy people. What usually happens is that the first look is done by HR for even tech jobs, and they just look for the qualifications, that maybe certifications, different experiences, or keywords that are in the resume. The IT people are usually going to get referred those, and then they'll get to do the interviewing for everybody else. But trustworthy, they're going to do some looks on the internet. What kind of things can they find out about you? Can they find out anything about you? Maybe look at your social media accounts and what you've been writing about anybody, maybe your old bosses, maybe anything that is available there. Training, orientation is also a responsibility of HR, even the security orientation. Now, IT may actually give the presentation, but they're responsible for the orientation, and they're also going to be responsible for training. Onboarding and setting up of user accounts. IT is going to actually do it. HR is going to tell you basically who they've hired, where they work, what kind of resources they have, what kind of clearance or what kind of permissions that they need, and we would then set those things up. Enforcement, security concerns and evaluations. If there are concerns, they should be annotated in the evaluations when you look at those things. Termination. And this is one that can get you into trouble. Termination in the IT world, and you really got to communicate with HR. You got to know when people are being terminated so that you can revoke their credentials. If you have badges that have the chips embedded that allow them to get to places, you've got to revoke those permissions. You've got to wipe that badge out so that they can't get into the building. They can't get into different areas in the building itself. So security credentials and the ethics. Their job is to promote a code of ethics. And with that one there, we talked a little bit about SANS and the template, just a real quick look. This is the ethics template, the overview, company name, committed to protecting employees, partners, vendors, and company from illegal or damaging actions by individuals, either knowingly or unknowingly. When address is blank company addresses issues proactively and uses corrective judgment, it will help us on down the line. And then the purpose, the thing that we talked about, the scope, the policy itself, the step by step of the policies themselves. Company awareness, maintaining ethical practices, unethical behavior, policy compliance, compliance measures, exceptions, non-compliance. Any employee found to violated this policy may be subject to disciplinary action up to and including termination of employment. And then we want users to acknowledge that they've been trained on these things, and then the change history record at the end of it. So the things that we saw in those: qualified, trustworthy, promote the ethics. And that's one of the templates that was available from SANS, just to give you a quick look at one of those. Secure personnel policies. Least privilege. We've heard that a lot of time. Limits the damage done by malice, error, or an attacker. Least privilege, the least access, least permissions, least everything that an individual can have and still function doing their job. They're going to say they can't, but but they can, and we do have to stay with the least privilege. And it's not easy to stay with the least privilege because you're going to be bombarded time after time after time. I need to be able to do this. I need to be able to do that. Mandatory vacations uncovers fraud, ongoing mistakes. Mandatory vacations, they're gone. You can see what's going on. Somebody else sits in the job, sees what's going on. This is right, this is wrong. Something doesn't seem right here. Lots of things go on there. And rotation of duties is the same way. Rotation of duties also has, I got you, John, has the ability to give a different view of what goes on in the job, or the right way to do the job. Military does that, and part of that is to get a fresh look at things. Part of that is so that you don't get somebody that is doing something improperly in the job. So rotation of duties, move people around. You get a better, maybe a more rounded employee, but you also have somebody else come in and look and see what's going on. Somebody been doing the job wrong, and somebody been doing the job fraudulently. With those things, is there fraud going on? Separation of duties, check one another's work, but also to prevent somebody from having too much authority in order to do some sorts of compromise. And I guess the easiest one to talk about in that example is one individual, one person does backups, and then somebody else has the authority to do the restores. Recertification, regular review and approval processes of what goes on. And the clean desk policy prevents data loss or theft. That only have the things on your desk that you're working on. Everybody's got an inbox and an outbox, but lock those things up. I worked in an office one time where the boss, every night you went home and you had to put all of their stuff, clean desk policy, put all of their stuff in the proper places. And you had to make a map of the desk because you'd come in early the next morning and put everything back to where it was. But clean desk policy, things are laying there. Because what happens at night is that's when they come in and clean the offices. What kind of clearance do those people have? And that's another thing to think about. What kind of clearance do those people have? If I were going to put a physical keystroke device on a machine, I give one of the cleaning crew $20, $50 here. Put this on the bosses, so that we had a the keystroke interception of all of the strokes that go on. So what do those people do? What do they see? Clean desk policy when you go home at night. Things really do need to be locked up, because lots of things go on when we are not available or not in the office, in the building. Asset management, the IT assets, computers, the network appliances, peripherals, the other devices, data and storage media, software licenses, and supporting infrastructure are all the things that we need to maintain track of. And then we have the roles. The owner is responsible for the security, deployment of the asset, the custodian responsible at the technical level, and the user, the access and use of the asset. And you check out a laptop to an individual. They're responsible for maintaining physical access to it. The custodian may be responsible for the antivirus and the programs that go onto it. And then the owner is responsible for the deployment of the asset when we do those things. Change management, always looking for a better way. And things do change. Situations change. Circumstances change. We need to update things that go on. Does it have a meaningful benefit? And we should have a change management team that looks at all of these things. Is it beneficial? What are the side effects? Are there any what are the unknowns with these things? The side effects, they could have some benefits, but we could also have some hindrances that goes on with these. How hard is it to implement? Who's going to be affected? Do we introduce new risks? Do we fix some of the existing risks that go on? How can the new risks be managed that we've done that? So there are lots of things that need to be looked at in the change management. Again, groups of individuals that let us know, do the analysis of that, so that can evaluate whether it needs to be done and what are all of these impacts going to be when we do that. So we don't have as many surprises. There's always going to be something that goes on with these things when you make changes. Agreements, and these are business agreements that we have interoperability with another company. You're going to have a mutual trust. And when we get into this, who owns the data? If we start having an agreement with another company to do sharing, working on things together, who owns the data? Who does the backups? How are we going to do privacy? The agreements have to define who's responsible for what, who owns what. What kind of process do you have to share data with others? And back to we talked about earlier, the privacy. What kind of privacy concerns should people have? What kind of privacy policies do you have? How are you going to protect the privacy, the information, or the privacy of the information of the individuals themselves? A group of business agreements, a service level agreement, formal definition of service provided to or by an organization. When you have an ISP, you'll have a service level agreement with the ISP. It's going to define all of the technical specifications for the network. It includes the uptime, what is the guaranteed uptime? 99% gives you like 5 days a year down. 5 nines, I think we saw that as like 12 or 17 minutes a year downtime. So what kind of guaranteed uptime are you going to have? What kind of bandwidth are you going to be guaranteed? How are you going to check these things? And there are tools that you can use to check to be sure that you're getting what you're paying for in the service level agreement. But it is a formal contract, and it's going to have guarantees in it. A memorandum of understanding, less formal agreement, mutual goals between 2 or more organizations. This is kind of the start of things. Yeah, we want to do something together. We want to build a better widget. We want to do this. We want to do that. We want to form this giant company. So you have a memorandum of understanding. We understand that we want to work together on this project. We haven't really committed to anything yet. The Interconnection Security Agreement, the ISA, security-focused document that specifies the technical requirements in forming a data connection between two parties. So we have an agreement, obviously, on security before there is any data sharing that goes on. A business partnership agreement, written agreement defining the general relationships between the two partners, share profit, loss, liability, who gets what, who does what. The non-disclosure agreement, legal agreement outlining the proprietary or confidential information that may not be disclosed. When you go to someplace else, you're going to, if you have proprietary information, you're going to have to sign a non-disclosure agreement before you go someplace else. Some companies will hire individuals based on what they know and then try to get them to violate these NDAs for the good job, the better job, the new job when they do those. Third-party concerns, onboarding and offboarding. Procedures like for employees, onboarding and offboarding a company in this case. When they come on, what are the things that we're going to do? And then if it doesn't work out, or if we decide not to do things, or the agreement time's over, how are you going to get them back off of your network? Data ownership is always going to be a big deal. Who owns the data? The data sharing, if you don't own it, don't share it. Security policies, do their policies meet your standards? Are their policies as stringent as yours are? Because they're going to have access to some of your data. They're probably going to store some of your data when they have that access. Are they giving it the same protections that you are doing? And then privacy considerations still are going to be a concern. What's the review process and who is involved in the review process? All things to be concerned about with these things. Adverse action policies, checks to perform in relation to benefits, background credit check, for instance. And this would be, obviously, we're back to kind of the individuals. What are we going to do? And then the reporting requirements, what to report and who do you report it to? How quickly an action has got to be reported. Privacy requirements for the background check. Remedies subjects can pursue to dispute or correct the results. So they do a background check on you and come up with something. I had one time. I was doing a BI background investigation for a special background investigation. Bring up top secret clearance. You have to be reviewed every 5 years. So they were doing an SBI bring up. And the guy came in and interviewed me and left. And the next morning he came into my office, closed all the doors, and sat down and said, "Were you ever in the Air Force?" Well, I had never been in the Air Force. I was in the Navy. And at some point, an individual who was in the Air Force had robbed an Air Force exchange in Germany. And his incident got put into the Air Force database under my Social Security number. So remedies that can pursue or dispute or correct results. Yeah, that was an incorrect result, but it certainly could have had a huge impact on my security clearance. If it had, of course, I would never have had a security clearance if it had been there. Social media risks, other than the time-consuming, and they can be time-consuming. People on it, the chat, all of those sorts of things. Single sign-on, use single sign-on with shared credentials on the media. And are they using the same credentials that they're using for the corporation, for the corporate account? You know, odds are that, yeah, it's an easy way to do that. I'll admit, I've got a lot of junk accounts, what I call junk accounts, that have got not a really easy password like password, but have a similar password, the different iterations of them, because they're junk accounts. I don't really care, but they probably could do harm if somebody actually compromised it. As long as I don't use those passwords on significant accounts, I think it's probably, I hope at least it's okay. Many employees, same password for personal accounts as for work accounts. Postings can reveal sensitive information. Maybe not tell the exact thing that's going on, but the circumstances, what's going on here, what's going on there. Anything that you post about the company should be approved by the company. And the company should be the only one that's doing the posting. And a lot of them have Twitter accounts and Facebook accounts to do those things. Postings for social engineering attacks. And then employee behaviors can be a liability for the employer. This is the maybe the threats that come out of the company's network. There could be some liability there for those individuals, or for the company, not the individuals, for the individuals too. So we'll talk a few minutes, there aren't very many slides in this one, about user training, role-based training to train employees in handling sensitive data, apply training as an ongoing process. So the roles, and we have different users and different roles. End users, common threats, we need to train them common threats and how to avoid them. The customer-facing employees, social engineering, public reputation, that they're not bad-mouthing the company. Everybody needs to be trained in social engineering, but the customer-facing employees need to have probably a higher level or more social engineering training, because they're going to deal with the people that would come in and effect that type of an attack. Privileged users, elevated privileges, and this goes back to an administrator's detailed procedures and evolving threats. We talk about them together. The big thing is that you don't really want them on the network logged in with those elevated privileges. There's more risk, and you need to educate them that there's more risk. And I think that we talked about the I Love You virus that was a lot of years ago. That was in the late 90s, I think, early 2000s maybe. That we had an instructor who had administrative authority, administrative privileges, that opened that virus. Did an awful lot of damage to the server because he was using his administrator account, not his regular user account. Regular user account, he would have done some damage, but only to the areas that he could get to, which would have been basically his home directory. So you need to be especially vigilant, I guess, with those accounts and not be logged on as those users all the time. Incident response teams respond to procedures and forensics. They need to be trained in what to do, how to do, when to do it, how to isolate, chain of custody, those sorts of things that are going to be important. If we have an incident, the chain of custody becomes absolutely critical in being able to present the information as evidence. And companies are at the point that they really do try to prosecute those sorts of things. Management, the high-level view of assets and general threats. One of the things is that you don't want management to have a lot of authority on the network. Say, well, they're the management, they're the boss, but they're not educated, knowledgeable in what they can do if they have that high-level authority when they do those things. It's kind of hard to turn those guys down. Just like plugging in the wrong device. When we talk about port security, yeah, port security is one of the ways to do that, and then you can explain that, yeah, it's dangerous and why it's dangerous to allow these other devices that aren't managed by the company and have the security that we need plugged into the network. Handling data should be classified. Data should be classified by nature, labeling, storage, and access permissions. It's got to be labeled. How's it going to be stored? What kind of security are we going to have on the storage? And then who has permissions to access all of these things. Special data handled appropriately. Personally identifiable information, HIPAA, medical. the payment card industry security standard, data security standard for credit card handling. All of those things, all of these things need to be handled appropriately but as customer as well as partner data in those. Data in transit, data on the wire, on the network, secure network protocols, and we've talked about those. Tunnels, SSH, don't use, or FTPS for the transfer, HTTPS. We're going to use encryption as much as possible. Sensitive data needs to be in the proper channels. We had double security. We have private networks, which are leased lines. We use leased lines to get to the internet, and then go between the campuses, leased lines, and to send things like the financial information and student information. All of it was stored centrally at the headquarters activity. To get it from one location to another, it went over a leased line that had a VPN connected on it. So sensitive information, proper channels, VPNs, tunnels, or whatever we're going to use, but some sort of an encryption for those devices. Mobile devices and removable storage are something that is it has been, but it's getting more and more difficult, I think, to deal with. The removable storage gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and it does more and more and more and more and more. And mobile devices, lots more capability than they used to have. One of the things that you can do is, you could plug it in, get the information on the from the machine that you have. Wireless devices. Plug in a wireless dongle, connect to the phone, and then have the cell connection go in someplace else, and we could exfiltrate data that way. What kind of devices are you going to allow to be plugged in to your network? Documents in and out of the workplace. How are we going to control them? How are we going to control access to them? We're going to have, a library sort of approach is probably one of the better ways to do that. Check them in, check them out. But if they're stored in an office, how often are you going to do an inventory, like a confidential document inventory that you would do on a regular basis? And then what happens if there's something missing with it? Then data disposal. Data disposal is always going to be an issue, especially the digital data disposal. How do we get rid of those digital devices themselves? Ongoing training, maintaining sufficiently secure passwords, the things that should be part of the training. And then how to create secure passwords. And I'm probably not the one to tell you how to create a secure password. I use my friends here at what is it? MasterPass, new key, KeePass, in order to, and it will generate secure, really good passwords for you. You're not going to remember them, so you better have it available. What it is a password management software that is password protected. So you got to have one good password to protect it. If somebody is able to hack it, they get all of your passwords. Clean desk policies and related training, clean desk policies, and just the simple thing that who comes in and goes through the building at night unaccompanied, unobserved, and whoever's doing the cleaning of the building is going to be there. Remind users of existing policies on recreational programs and websites, or consider adding new controls. Maybe we're going to have a program, an application whitelist, what programs can be run on the network, or an application blacklist, programs that can't be run on the network. Clearly defined mobile policy, training about the devices. Social engineering pitfalls. And social engineering, somebody that's good at social engineering is good at social engineering. They're going to cause issues for us. Scams, phishing attempts, all sorts of those going on all of the time, and keeping up to date with them I don't know if you really can or not, but if it's one of those, looks like a duck, walks like a duck, quacks like a duck, probably a duck. So be careful. Something, too good, sounds too good to be true, probably is, sort of arrangement. Importance of enabling security controls after maintenance. If we have to disable security controls to do some maintenance, then we need to put them back on. And that's kind of a part of the standard operating procedure, or the process is that we would have that, part of the checklist. Step last should be, yep, did I re-enable all of the security controls that I disabled while I was doing the maintenance? In this one, we're going to talk about physical security and safety a little bit. Physical security, probably one of the easier things to see, maybe not necessarily one of the easier things to do, but one of the easier things to see and to do maybe elegantly, so that you don't have an ugly fence around your building with concertina wire on top that looks like it's a prison and going to scare people away. But about the location and facility constraints on physical security, surveillance systems, secure entryways and equipment, protect environment and personnel with environmental controls, and then a couple of slides on fire suppression systems. So physical access, and what this is showing, we got the grounds, there's a fence around it or some sort of a barrier fence around it. Tractive fence is okay. We moved into a building that had been a data bank center. It had a lot of security. It had a big chain link fence, probably a 10-foot chain link fence with concertina wire on the top of it. Activated gates, sliding gates to get in and out of it. Not exactly attractive when you're trying to get students to come into, but fence around it. We have the grounds, the parking lot, the building interior, and this shows the server room on the interior of the building. Where are you going to put the important people? What kind of barriers are we going to go? Function over fashion. Yeah, you can have function over fashion unless function runs away all of your customers. Sometimes you've got to come up with ways to have maybe more attractive. We didn't really need that fence. The bank did. When you look at those things, so the parking lot have areas of approach so that you can see people coming. And some of the things that I think we talked about in Network Plus that aren't in this particular one is windows. Where are you going to place the windows? Where are you going to have the executives? What part of the building? They're always going to want to be in the ones where they have the best view. Might not be the safest place. Where are you going to put the NOC? Where are you going to put the server room? And this is zone 3. Zone 1 is the ground. Zone 2 is the building interior. Zone 3 is the server room, which is on the interior of the building. Has some sort of protection getting into it. Other things where we're going to store other important information. Are we going to have, secure areas and more secure areas, or maybe secure areas and open areas? What about visitors? How are they going to log in? We've got an entrance here. Somebody going to greet them? Are we going to let anybody in? Are we going to have a sort of a man trap, or at least 2 doors that we can, maybe something bad happens, we can lock the interior doors and maybe lock both of them, get them trapped in there. Banks have that, although I've never heard of them actually trapping a bank robber in them, but you'd think they'd be able to do that, wouldn't you? The parking lot, how do you get into it? What are the zones of approach with these things? How are you going to see somebody coming? How are you going to see users coming? What kind of surveillance devices are you going to have? Lighting. Lighting is one of the better ways, nighttime, to keep people out of areas when we do those things. So physical access to the buildings. The facility and concerns, the location issues. Where are we? Are we in a crime-intensive area? Disaster areas, flood areas, tornadoes, hurricanes for you guys in Jacksonville, tornadoes for you guys in Dallas, flooding for all of us. What kind of utilities are available? Are they reliable? What kind of backups do we have with these things? But the facilities themselves. And what kind of emergency assistance do we have? Does the fire department, how long does it take for them to get there? Perimeter walls and fences, what kind of do we have? Various heights, and then it depends on what we're trying to protect. Yeah, a bank data center probably needs quite a bit of security. A school, not as much. Still needs security, but not as much as the data center. The sturdiness, the K rating of the fences themselves, sensors and cameras, the visibility, and we like to put foundation plants around our houses and around our buildings. And then we kind of sometimes look good when they get tall, and except that they now shield somebody trying to break into the facility. So what kind of visibility are we going to have? If we cut them all down and say, oh, it's ugly, but the visibility is a lot better for the law enforcement that's maybe patrolling, or for cameras that are watching what's going on. Barriers, what kind of barriers are we going to have coming into the area? We're going to have gates going up and going down. What kind of barriers coming into the building? Are you going to have a turnstile? You're going to have a man trap, the two door type sort of arrangement, so that one's got to be closed before the other one opens. Or maybe you're going to have, like the schools are going to, you have to be buzzed into the building. They have, stand at the front door. Maybe they have the two-door arrangement, and then they can watch you on camera, buzz you in. What kind of barriers? Secure doors and windows. What are we going to have? Walls from floor to ceiling. Remember what that is addressing is the false ceilings that are in a lot of the buildings. Does the wall go all the way up, or can somebody climb up into the false ceiling and go into an area that they shouldn't be in, like the NOC, the Network Operations Center, where all the data store, where all the servers are, where all of the devices are. Visibility and access, lighting, and escape routes. How are we going to get out? And the type of locks that we have, do they fail open or do they fail closed? Fail open is they fail unlocked. Fail closed is they fail locked. What kind of safety issues might we have? If we had a fire and they failed locked, failed closed, how's the fire department going to get in? If they fail open, how are you going to maintain security? So you have to make some decisions on what kind of, what risks are you going to take? Which is the bigger risk that we have? Surveillance systems, and this is nothing magic at all. Night vision, wireless, hidden, motion sensitive, and it says cameras hidden. You may want them hidden, you may want them visible, because a visible camera may prove to be a deterrent. Night vision, you want them to be able to see at night, the night vision cameras. Probably wireless, although if they're wireless, they can be jammed if somebody finds out about them. Again, upsides and downsides to each of these things. The upside for wireless is you don't have to have any wires go into it. They're easy to install, just like wireless access points are easy to install. So, motion sensitive devices. Motion sensitive lights, I think, are one of the good things to do that with. Alarms and sensors, motion, window and door sensors, pressure sensors, and these may be pressure sensors on floors, that somebody walks on a floor, the wrong pressure gives an alarm, particularly secure areas for things like that. Glass break. And glass break, if you have a burglar alarm at home, you probably have a glass break detector. When we were in Norfolk, we had one of those, and Christmas time, I think the dog was downstairs and hit a Christmas ornament, knocked it off of the tree. Well, the glass break detector detected it. They said that the motion sensor that the dog was okay, and it was, but they knocked the ornament off and broke it, not okay. Environmental alarms, environmental controls, environmental alarms. What happens if the air conditioning goes out, let's say Saturday afternoon, and it's going to be 105 degrees Saturday and Sunday, which is not unusual for the areas. I mean, it could easily happen for the areas that most of you guys are, probably not where Bell is or where I am, but Jacksonville and Dallas and San Antonio easily could happen. What's going to happen to your IT resources if that goes out and you get that kind of heat? So you need environmental alarms and sensors for those things. Security guards, yeah, if you need security guards, that's always a good thing to have, part of the deterrent, the detective, and all the other types of deterrents that we would have with them. Entryways, different ways to get into these things. Conventional locks, the old key to do those things. Electronic locks could have passcodes. The ID badge, we had the ID badge with the readers on them that you tapped your badge on the sensor in order to get into particular areas of all of the buildings. This was at the health agency where I was the network administrator. You had to tap your badge to make the elevator work, because not everybody could go to every floor on that. Electronic tokens, biometrics to get these things, and then the fail secure, fail open, fail secure, fail safe, fail open, fail closed type of locks. How are the locks going to fail if there is, like a power failure? What goes on? Do we have guards and man trap? We have talked about entry logging. Users come to visit. They need to be logged in, a visitor's badge, and then they should have somebody escorting them. What's going to happen? What kind of training are you going to have? What's going to happen if somebody finds an individual without a badge or with a visitor's badge walking around by themselves? And particularly if they're in a secure area. Who is your escort? What are you going to do? What's going to be the process for those individuals? And entry logging to be sure that at the end of the day that everybody that logged in is logged out, that you haven't lost a visitor someplace in the building. Securing equipment, hardware rooms, usually the network operations center, hardware locks on the hardware itself. The hardware locks work, you can have them to lock things down. We locked down a bunch of desktops one time, and they were pretty ugly. The locks were. You can lock the cases. You can have security screws in them. You can have alarms on the cases. And a lot of them have, a number of machines have BIOS alarms on the cases now when you do those things. Lock safes. Safes, if you have them and they're open all the time, they're not very safe. They're not doing you a whole lot of good. Where are you going to put your wireless access points? They should be someplace that individuals can't get to them. We used to put ours in the overhead. Was it the best? Yeah, probably not. But it worked because people didn't know where they were. They weren't visible. We did have one in a room that we had to set up. We used wireless in, and it was visible, and one of the students decided that it wasn't working right one day, so it wasn't high enough and out of the way and hidden, and decided to reset it, which wiped out all of the configuration that we had done on it to allow it to work. And then it really didn't work. Network outlets and cables. Where are they? Are the ones that aren't in use disabled at the switch end when we do those things? And then social engineering. Social engineering keeps coming and coming and coming because it's the thing that happens in a lot of cases with these things. The HVAC, the systems themselves, temperature range 64 to 80 degrees is what we should have. And the picture here shows a hot aisle. We're going to have a hot aisle and a cold aisle. What that says is if you have a number of racks of servers, you want all of the exhaust fans facing each other. Bring the cool air in the hot aisle, and then you exhaust the hot air from the hot aisle from the system. So 64 to 80 degrees, and a lot of the saying is if you're comfortable, your equipment probably is. If you're hot and sweaty, it probably is. If you're really cold, it probably is. Humidity range 40% to 60%. Electrostatic discharge can be fatal to devices. It does damage to the chips. And it won't necessarily show up immediately. It may do damage, and over the course of time, the damage causes a weakness and then eventually causes a failure of the integrated circuits. HVAC settings, are they turned down at night? HVAC settings probably should be about the same 24 hours a day in these devices. Airflow here, the hot and the cold aisles. And then any sudden changes in temperature can cause issues because we get condensation in the cases of the devices. And condensation of water, not a good thing to have in the electronic equipment. EMI shielding. I added a couple of pictures in here. The electromagnetic interference or radio frequency interference, and the sources, motors, microwaves, HVAC, industrial equipment. And what the one at the top is showing a clean signal, and then we get a degraded signal at the destination. We don't really want those things. And then the protections that we can have is shielded cables. The Faraday cage is the one here with the two ladies in it. It keeps signals in or keeps signals out. It might, is what I say, it's not an active jammer. It might interfere with cell phone signals. It might keep in our wireless signals for those things. The other one is the Tempest standards, and what this shows is this guy here with a receiver receiving the image from the screen. And yes, that actually can happen. And the thing on the right there is a Tempest cage. What the Tempest standards are shielding to prevent EMI transmissions from devices. There was a story that years ago that you could go to Radio Shack, so you can tell how old it was because they don't exist anymore as far as I can tell, and buy for about $100 the equipment that was needed to receive the image from a monitor a couple miles away. So EMI Tempest standards are designed to shield computer equipment, electromagnetic equipment. One of the things that could help this guy here is if he turned the desk around so that the monitor wasn't exposed. So, placement of devices and where you sit in an office can affect what goes on with these things also. Fire suppression. The fire extinguishers, Class A, solids, B, liquids, C, electrical equipment. Class D for metals, K for cooking oils, and the different systems. I've got another slide here on what you can use for each of those. Sprinkler systems are good, but sprinkler systems in an electronic area, not so good because we're flooding it with water. Halon is an inert gas, and halon's not available anymore. It worked, but it apparently does some damage to the atmosphere. That we use that in the main spaces on the gas turbine ship I was on. The gas turbine modules had halon flooding systems. The advantage of it over CO2 is it doesn't kill you instantly. It is an inert gas. CO2 is what we would typically use on electrical fires. And I think really what you get with an electrical fire, it doesn't put out the electrical portion of it. We turn the power off, and the arcing and the sparking goes away, and then we use the CO2 to put out the fire that's left on the shielding, the insulation on the devices that are inside of it. But what we use for each of these, the Class A combustible materials, and the way I was taught, Class A fires, white smoke. Water, foam, dry powder, everything but CO2, wet chemical, can be used on those. A Class B, flammable liquids, usually petroleum products, paint, petroleum, going to be a black smoke. Foam, dry powder, CO2 can be used on those. And typically foam, dry powder, purple K powder, and foam to smother it is that was our preferred method for fighting those types of fires. Class C, they have here flammable gases, and then on down the line we have electrical. But Both of them are going to be with it says dry powder, or with dry powder for the flammable gases, butane and methane. For electrical, it's got the dry powder and the CO2. You can use the dry powder, but you're going to probably wind up with a lot of corrosion in your electrical equipment. So, you know, can it be used? Yeah. Is it one of the preferred methods? Not really. And then for the deep fat fryers, or the Class D, the dry powder, lithium, potassium, dry powder, purple K. Sand is also one of the Class D fire suppressants that you can use. Class F, deep fat fryers, we're going to use wet chemicals on it when we do those. And then the comments are available here. I want to keep going because we're just about to the end of this. Coordinating security and safety, consult the building layout to compare secure areas, fire escape routes. Are there sufficient routes? Can we get out? Have fire drills. And you may be required to have fire drills, but fire drills, do people know their way out of the building? And you'd be surprised how many people think they do and they don't. Particularly, you know, fire here, what's the alternate way out? They know at least one way in or out. They should know multiple ways in and out of the building. Use fail open locks for a safe escape, fail close for security. Fail open, fails unlocked, fail close, fails locked. So different areas may have different ones. You got to remember, though, if we use a fail close for security, and that's where the fire is, the firefighters can't get into the room when we have those. So use alarmed one-way emergency exits. Use separate alert systems for security and safety emergencies. Regularly conduct emergency drills, and then coordinate drills with security personnel, coordinate drills with the fire department too. They get upset if you don't do that.